My granddaughter called me from a park bench. Not her mother, not a shelter, a park bench in October in Calgary. I was sitting in my kitchen in Kelowna when the phone rang. I saw her name on the screen, Claire, my daughter, but it was a small voice I didn't recognize at first. 7 years old, careful and quiet, like she was trying not to take up too much space. Grandma? Mom is crying and she told me not to call anyone, but I didn't know what else to do. I was already standing up. Where are you, sweetheart? The park near the library. The big one with the fountain. Is your little brother with you? He's sleeping in the stroller. Good girl. You did the right thing calling me. Don't move. I hung up and called Claire. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I texted. I know where you are. I'm coming. Don't go anywhere. Then I booked the next flight from Kelowna to Calgary. Departed in 2 hours. I didn't pack slowly. I didn't sit down to think about it. I've been a family law paralegal for 31 years. I know what a woman sitting on a park bench with 2 children and nowhere to go looks like, even when I can't see her yet. I knew exactly what I was walking into. Claire was 34 years old and had spent the last 6 years building a life she thought was solid. She met her husband, I'll call him my son-in-law, though that title feels generous now, at a conference in Vancouver. He was charming and well-dressed and very certain of himself, the kind of man who makes you feel chosen just by talking to you. His family owned a mid-sized logistics company out of Edmonton, old money. Or at least money that had been around long enough to act old. His father, my son-in-law's father, a man I will call simply my daughter's father-in-law, ran the company. He had opinions about everything. How to raise children, how to run a household, which families were worth knowing and which weren't. When Claire married into that family, I watched carefully. I smiled at dinners. I brought wine. I noticed things, and I kept them to myself, because Claire was happy, and sometimes happiness deserves a little room before you start picking at its edges. But I noticed how my son-in-law deferred to his father about everything: which city to live in, which school my granddaughter would attend, whether Claire should continue working after the baby was born. I noticed how my daughter's father-in-law spoke to Claire at family dinners, not rudely, never rudely, but in the particular tone of a man who considers you a guest in a house you didn't know you were just visiting. I noticed. And I waited. When I landed in Calgary and took a cab to the park, I found Claire on a bench near the fountain, exactly where her daughter said she'd be. She had a double stroller, 2 rolling suitcases, a diaper bag, and the expression of someone who has run out of crying and moved somewhere past it. My granddaughter ran to me the moment she saw my coat. I held her for a long moment, then I walked to the bench and sat beside my daughter. She didn't say anything right away, neither did I. My grandson was asleep in the stroller, one small fist curled under his chin, completely unaware. Tell me, I said. She told me. 3 days earlier, my daughter's father-in-law had called her into the office. She had been working at the family company for 2 years as their operations coordinator, a role she was good at, a role she had improved measurably, and told her that her employment was being terminated. He cited performance issues. There was a document. There was an HR representative in the room she had never met before. It was clean and procedural and completely without warning. She called her husband from the parking lot. He said he knew. He said it was complicated. He said maybe it was for the best because she could focus on the children now. That was when she understood that this wasn't something being done to both of them. This was something being done to her with his knowledge, possibly with his blessing. She went home to his family's property, a house on land that was owned by the company, a detail she had understood abstractly, but had never felt the weight of until that afternoon, and found that the locks had been changed. Her clothing was in boxes on the front step. She had her purse, her phone, her children, and the suitcases she'd managed to pack in the 40 minutes between the locksmith leaving and her realizing she had nowhere to go. She hadn't called me because she was ashamed. She'd been sitting on that bench for 6 hours when her daughter picked up my phone number from memory and called without asking permission. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Then I said, "Okay, let's go." I got us a suite at a hotel near downtown. 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen, a bathtub big enough for 2 small children. I ordered food. I ran a bath. I let Claire sit on the couch and stare at the wall for an hour while I handled the children, because sometimes a person needs an hour to just exist in the wreckage before they can start looking for the door. When the children were asleep, I sat across from my daughter at the small kitchen table and I opened my notebook. I have carried a notebook for 31 years. It's a habit from work. You write things down. You write them down while they're fresh, and you write them with dates, and you don't let details drift. Start at the beginning, I said. Everything you remember. We're going to write it all down. She looked at the notebook. Mom, I don't have money for a lawyer. I know some lawyers, I said. Start talking. She talked for 2 hours. I wrote for 2 hours. By the time she was finished, I had 4 pages of notes and a fairly clear picture of what had been done to her and, more importantly, how. The termination without cause in Alberta, after 2 years of employment, that triggers severance obligations under the Employment Standards Code. The amount owed wasn't small. The manner of termination, with a prepared HR document and a stranger in the room, suggested this had been planned for some time. That mattered. The housing situation was more complicated, but also more interesting. Claire had lived in that house for 4 years. She had made documented improvements to the property. She had paid for some of those improvements herself, with her own money I had watched her save. In family law and in property law, that creates something called unjust enrichment. It doesn't always go anywhere, but it goes somewhere. And then there was the thing Claire mentioned almost in passing, the thing she didn't think was important. He fired me 2 weeks before the company's quarterly bonus cycle, she said. Everyone in operations gets a bonus. I've gotten it the last 2 years. I stopped writing and looked up. How much? She told me. I wrote it down and drew a circle around it. I want to be honest about something. I am not a lawyer. I have worked beside lawyers for 3 decades. I have read more employment files and family law briefs than most people will see in a lifetime, and I know exactly where the lines are. I stayed on my side of those lines. Everything I did correctly. But I also know how to find the right lawyer, and I know what a strong file looks like before a lawyer has even seen it. And I know that when you walk into a lawyer's office with 4 pages of organized, dated notes and a clear timeline and documentary evidence already identified, you are not the same client as someone who walks in crying with a shoebox of unsorted papers. I called a colleague in Calgary the next morning, a woman I had worked with years ago, now a partner at an employment law firm downtown. I told her what I had. She told me to come in at 2 o'clock. I also called a second person. A friend of my daughter's from university, someone Claire had lost touch with but who I had kept a loose connection with over the years, the way mothers sometimes do. This friend worked in corporate accounting. I won't say more than that. I'm 63 years old. I have been collecting useful friendships my entire life. This is one of the returns on that investment. The meeting with the employment lawyer lasted 90 minutes. By the end of it, we had the basis for a wrongful dismissal claim. The timing of the termination relative to the bonus cycle suggested an arguable case for bad faith, something the courts in Alberta have been increasingly willing to consider. We had a severance demand letter ready to send. We had a number. The number was not small. Claire sat in that office and watched a lawyer in a good suit explain, calmly and precisely, that what had been done to her was not just cruel, it was legally costly. She had arrived on a park bench with 2 suitcases. She was leaving with a file and a strategy. I watched her sit up a little straighter. That was the moment I'd been waiting for. The response to the demand letter came faster than I expected. I think my daughter's father-in-law assumed Claire had no resources. That she was isolated, and she had been, slowly, over 6 years. The way these things happen, dinners declined, friendships that drifted, a move to a city where she knew no one but his family. I think he assumed she would be overwhelmed, that she would take whatever small offer was put in front of her, sign a release, and disappear quietly. He didn't know about the notebook. He didn't know about my colleague downtown. He didn't know that my daughter had a mother who had spent 31 years watching families get taken apart and put back together, and who knew exactly which screws to tighten and which doors to open. His company's lawyer responded with an offer. It was insultingly low. My colleague sent back a counter. We attached documentation. We attached the bonus records from the previous 2 years. We attached receipts for the home improvements Claire had paid for herself. which I had asked her to photograph and organize the second evening we were in the hotel, while the children were watching a movie and eating crackers. We also, and I want to be careful here, because I want to be honest about what we did and didn't do, we also asked my daughter's accounting friend a few questions about publicly available information, about the company's filings, about certain patterns that were visible if you knew where to look. She found something. I won't go into detail because it's not my story to tell entirely, and because it's still, in some form, ongoing. But what she found suggested that the company had been managing its books in a way that certain regulatory bodies in Alberta would find interesting. It was not hidden. It was simply not something anyone had looked at carefully. We didn't threaten anyone. We didn't do anything improper. But when my colleague sent the second counter letter, she included a line about our client's intention to ensure all relevant matters were properly reviewed in the course of litigation. The third response came within a week. The number had changed significantly. I want to tell you about my son-in-law because I think he deserves a paragraph. He called Claire 3 times during those 2 weeks. The first time, he told her she was being dramatic. The second time, he told her his father was just protecting the family's interests and she needed to understand that. The third time, he cried. He said he loved her. He said he hadn't known his father was going to do it that way. He said he wanted to fix things. Claire listened to all 3 calls. She was polite, she didn't yell, she didn't make promises. After the third call, she looked at me and said, "He knew." "Yes," I said. "He knew for at least a week before it happened." "Probably longer," I said. She nodded slowly and looked out the window at the Calgary skyline. My granddaughter was drawing at the kitchen table behind us. My grandson had figured out how to pull himself up on the hotel coffee table and kept doing it and falling and laughing about it. "Okay," Claire said. "That was all. Just, okay." I understood what she meant. The settlement was finalized 6 weeks after I landed in Calgary. Claire received her full severance as required under the Employment Standards Code, plus an additional amount reflecting the bad faith element of her termination. She received compensation for the home improvements. She received a sum that accounted for the bonus she would have received had she not been conveniently terminated 2 weeks before the cycle closed. She also received, through the family law process that ran parallel because the marriage itself was ending, and that process takes longer, but it had begun proper recognition of her contributions over 6 years, the financial and the practical, and the ones that don't have a line item but matter anyway. She found an apartment in Calgary, a good one, 2 bedrooms, near a school my granddaughter liked when they walked by it one afternoon. She enrolled both children in activities. She reached back out to a friend she'd lost touch with. Then another. I stayed for 3 weeks. I cooked a lot of soup. I read the same picture book 40 times. I watched my grandson figure out walking, then running, then the complicated art of running towards something and stopping just before you hit it. When I flew back to Kelowna, I cried on the plane. Not because things were bad, because they were going to be all right, and I had been holding my breath for a month, and somewhere over the Rockies I finally let it out. I've thought a lot since then about the bench in the park. About a 7-year-old girl who wasn't supposed to call anyone but knew her grandmother's number by heart and made the call anyway. People ask me sometimes, people who know pieces of this story, whether I was angry, whether I wanted to go after my daughter's father-in-law myself, make something dramatic happen, a confrontation, a scene. I wasn't. I didn't. I've worked in family law for too long to find satisfaction in confrontations. The satisfaction is in the file. It's in the letter. It's in watching a well-prepared case move down a corridor it was built to move through. My daughter's father-in-law is not a man who will ever fully understand what hit him, or that it came from a 63-year-old woman in a hotel suite with a notebook and 31 years of paying attention. That's fine. He doesn't need to understand it. Understanding it was never the point. The point was, Claire, in a new apartment, in a city that is becoming hers, with 2 children who don't sit quietly on park benches anymore because they don't have to. The point was my granddaughter, who called me when she was frightened because she knew I would come. I want to say something to anyone watching this who recognizes part of this story. Not the specific details, the logistics, the settlement, the lawyers. I mean the part that comes before all of that, the bench, the suitcases, the slow understanding that someone you trusted had been making calculations about your future without telling you, and the calculations didn't include you coming out ahead. That part. If you're in that part right now, I want you to know something I know from 3 decades of watching these situations. The moment you feel most alone is usually not the moment you are most alone. It's the moment right before the phone rings, right before someone who has been watching quietly from a distance finally sees it's time to step in. Write things down. Write them down with dates. Keep receipts. Keep texts. Keep emails. Not because you're planning for war, because you're protecting yourself the way you deserve to be protected. And if you have someone like me in your life, a mother, an aunt, a friend who is calm and practical and has been paying attention, don't wait 6 hours on a park bench before you call them. Call them. You are not a burden. You are not dramatic. You are not asking for too much. And if you're the person on the other end of the phone, the one being called, I hope you already have your notebook. I hope you're already standing up. Because this is what we do. This is what we've always done. We show up, we write things down, we find the right people, and then we make sure the people who thought there would be no consequences find out, one careful legal letter at a time, exactly how wrong they were. My name isn't important. What matters is that my daughter's daughter knew my number by heart. That, I think, is the whole story. If any part of what I shared today resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone sitting on a bench right now, figuratively or literally, please share this with them. We take care of each other up here. That's who we are.